Welcome to 50 Years of Her Story, a podcast from the U.S. Coast Guard Academy Alumni Association. I am your host, Nicolle Bogden, class of 2012. This series honors the women who helped shape the Coast Guard Academy over the past 50 years, the pioneers who opened doors, challenged expectations, and fought to create opportunities for the generations that followed. In this episode, I am joined by retired Vice Admiral Sandy Stosz, Coast Guard Academy class of 1982. Sandy grew up in Maryland, a tomboy with 3 younger brothers who never let her fall behind. A newspaper clipping her neighbor dropped off about service academies opening their doors to women sent her towards the Coast Guard Academy, where she entered in 1978 as part of the Academy's 3rd class of women. What followed was a 40-year career defined by firsts. The first woman to command a Coast Guard cutter on the Great Lakes, and in 2011, the first woman ever to lead any of the nation's armed forces service academies as superintendent. Her story is one of naivete that turned into resolve, of building trust instead of demanding it, and of refusing, again and again, to be defined only by being first. This is Sandy's Her Story. Morning, Admiral. Thank you so much for joining us today on 50 Years of Her Story.
Good morning, Nicolle. I'm honored to be here and glad to be talking about our stories.
Yes, I can't wait. I can't wait to hear your journey. I remember being with you at the Academy when I was there as a cadet and honestly didn't know too much about your journey to the Academy and those historic moments that were happening in real time. And so it's going to be real exciting to hear how it's all happened.
Well, it's exciting to circle back and now have a cadet asking questions of the former superintendent instead of the other way around. So that's fun.
Yeah. And I'm glad it's working out this way instead of the other way.
Yes.
To get started, I would love to know how you grew up, where kind of you're from, and that process of learning about the Academy and getting to the Academy.
Sure, Nicolle. I was born in 1960 in Ellicott City, Maryland. I was the oldest of 4 children, 3 younger brothers, but we were all 3 years and 10 months apart, as my mother's fond of saying. So I had a lot of boys around me all the time. I was a tomboy. My parents expected the same thing of me as they did of my brothers. They didn't treat me any differently. They were both athletes. They had met at college sporting events, and my brothers and I were all athletic. So I was running around with the boys all the time. And I think that paved the way for me to be able to transition pretty easily into an all-male environment at the Coast Guard Academy, or an almost all-male. So being born in 1960, in 1972, Title IX was passed into law. That was the the law that gave equal opportunity in sports to women and girls. And also the next year, the Equal Rights Amendment. So when I was a young teenager, the women's rights movement was in full swing, and it opened the doors for young girls like me to have opportunities our parents didn't have. So in 1975, when I was a junior in high school, my next door neighbor walked over a copy of the Baltimore Sun, and it was giving a feature article on the Naval Academy right down the street in Annapolis. And it talked about how the Naval Academy was opening its doors to women. So in 1976, starting in 76, all the service academies on the heels of this women's rights movement were forced by law to open their doors to women. They've been for men only until then. So I was reading this article my neighbor had brought over about all the opportunities for women to come in now and what the Naval Academy was about. You get to go to sea, be part of something bigger than yourself, and it was free. And that was a big deal in the 70s when we were going through the oil shock and the Great Recession during that time. So I was influenced in my childhood by being on the swim team. I had a coach, PJ Kesmodal, who inspired me as a young swimmer. And when I got into high school, he was my guidance counselor. And I came in to see him and told him, PJ, I've made up my mind. I'm going to the Naval Academy. I went through all the application processes. And he said to me, Sandy, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. Look at this pamphlet I just got from this place called the Coast Guard Academy up in New London, Connecticut. And we pored over that pamphlet, and between the two of us, we decided the Coast Guard was a small Navy. I'd never heard of it. And so that I would apply to the Coast Guard Academy as a backup. And the Naval Academy is a political nomination-based application process, and it goes forever. So I sat with a senator, and then, have to go through, get the nomination. Meanwhile, I applied to the Coast Guard Academy, and I heard back really fast. And I made my decision to accept that letter to go to the Coast Guard Academy because on thinking about it, I wanted to be part of something who valued me for what I knew, not who I knew.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad looking back that I chose the Coast Guard over the Navy because the Navy women were relegated to support roles for decades until the laws were changed. They had combat exclusion laws that precluded them from serving on the pointy end of the spear. We Coast Guard women didn't. And it was wonderful to be able to not have those structural barriers standing in the way of a young woman like me wanting to achieve my full potential. So that's my very, very condensed version of my younger age story about how coaches from athletics and then my guidance counselor, the same man, influenced and guided me. And that's how I got into the Coast Guard Academy.
Wow. The Coast Guard's pretty lucky then that they reached out first, right? And
Right.
were able to get you before the Navy came back.
Yes.
No, but that's so true about being accepted into a service that is based off merit as opposed to those nominations and getting those, signatures and whatnot. I've been to the Naval Academy a few times and it's gorgeous and beautiful, but I too am so grateful I picked the Coast Guard Academy because of that mission and kind of the availability of jobs and access to things as women that may not have happened, especially during your time when it was kind of all just starting out.
Right.
So I also have 3 brothers and know what it's like to kind of run around and, you kind of got to keep up or they're just going to take over. But I am the oldest as well. So it's that motherly instinct for them, but a lot of that tough love and going and getting ready to go to the Coast Guard Academy in this time where it's new and there's definitely polarizing opinions of women joining the service and becoming integrated into all of that. As not a child at this point, but as somebody entering this situation, were you aware of maybe some backlash that you were going to receive and maybe it wasn't going to be totally welcoming and accepting and how did you mentally prepare for that?
Nicolle, I was a little bit naive. I had always believed that hard work and perseverance got you where you wanted to go and that I didn't hear anything about that. It didn't make the news in those days. Women were just going to these places and you didn't have, keep in mind, no social media in those days, just what news reporters would report. So no, I didn't have any idea that it was going to be so novel. I was used to integrated high school with boys and girls, young men and women, all in the same school. I didn't think anything of it yet until I arrived there.
Okay. So you get there, you're now the 3rd class of women at the academy. And so there are women cadre for you.
Yes.
And there's enough women for you to not feel like the only one. But from what I've learned through other stories, the culture wasn't necessarily great for women. For some, and others, it wasn't as bad, right? Is that the first time you were like, whoa, there are people that don't want me here?
So there were 5% women in a corps of cadets of 1,000 by the time the 3rd class with women came in. We had 30 women in our class and a class of about 320 entering. Keep in mind, attrition rate for everybody in those days overall was 50%, 50. So it was a mission of attrition, right? In those days, you probably heard that from other people. So it was hard for everybody. By the time I came in with a 3rd class of women, the men in my class were very similar to what you get in high school. The boys had their groups, the girls had theirs. I think nowadays there's more integration and young men and women have friendships across the genders. Back in my day, in the 70s, we're talking 50 years ago, it was a little more segregated that way. So same with the academy, but I had a lot of classmates who were very supportive. And surely the first class that had women, those men had some pride in being the last class without women. And there were a few of them that defined the class, sadly, because a lot of those men were very accepting. And they don't get credit for it because their class is defined by the minority who were jerks and weren't accepting of women. I had a lot of good men and women who were cadre and above, who treated me with respect and decency and tried to help me grow and achieve my potential. And I will tell you, my first set of cadres of Swab Summer were wonderful people. They were Karen Tweed and Michelle Fitzpatrick, 2 women, and Mike Norino and Dave Stalter was just wonderful second-class cadets who all wanted to see us succeed and didn't treat us women any different. So we did have good support from both the upper-class men and women. So my experience was actually pretty good because I look at it left and right when I was there, and there was a lot of men having a harder time than I was because I was pretty adaptable. I'd had 3 brothers. I was strong. I had faced some adversity in my life, and I feel like I had an easier time than some of the men who were not as well prepared.
Yeah. That's a great way, and I love that outlook on it. And I also feel like I'm a fairly positive person in that I won't necessarily dwell on a hard experience in a negative way, but like, all right, let's get through this. I know you like to say you navigate a lot in uncharted waters, and that's kind of what this was for you. But I'm sure there were challenges. Do you have any stories of challenges that you persevered through throughout your time at the academy?
It was just, I was not the biggest, fastest, strongest, or best looking. I was very average. And it was interesting to come into the academy, whatever class, whatever year you're coming in. Nowadays, back in my day, you're on top of your class in high school. Then you come into the Coast Guard Academy and you're all of a sudden very average, right? Because you're all coming from the top of your class. So you're very average. I found it difficult to end up being very average and to be so overwhelmed with the academics. So I'm not even talking about men who didn't want you there looking down on you. The academics were very, very difficult for me. I wasn't prepared. I didn't have the calculus that some young people had coming in, and that dominated everything. So it was survival mode for me. And compared the smaller things that happened, if somebody was picking on me, which they did a lot in those days, that was temporary, but the academics was permanent, a permanent need to succeed. So I think that made it easier for me to deal with the smaller things, but it was hard. I'll give you one example. Back in my day, 3rd class with women, you had to attend these cadet dances. We even had a social director who taught us how to dance, like the New York swing, the waltz, a couple things. And imagine having just a few women in a room of hundreds, and then you had to learn how to dance. And then for the dances, the academy would bus women in, real girls. So we were not real girls. And even our classmates that were nice to us, when it came time to dancing with us, we weren't real girls. We were with them. We were part of them. So even if they weren't trying to be mean, it was just this whole attitude that we girls weren't real girls. These are real girls coming in from Babson College or something, being bussed in to be dates for the guys for this mandatory dance. You had to go to the dance or you got demerits. And how did you find a date if you were one of the few girls and none of the boys wanted to go with you?
Yeah.
And there was no bussing in of boys or men from local colleges. So I'd say academics was really, really hard, overarching. But some of the things that were small, you might not think much of them, but just having to go to a dance and just no way to get a date. And it was incredibly stressful and an incredible confidence deflator. If you even had any confidence to start with, it was gone.
Yeah. And isolating too. That must have felt so isolating.
Like and nobody meant it on purpose. So a lot of the things at the academy that were hard for us first women were not deliberate acts of isolation. It just was because the system wasn't set up yet for providing male dates for these required dances, or not making the dances required.
Right.
Funny looking back, it makes for a good laugh.
I can only imagine how challenging those first few years were for you. But then, obviously, you graduated and you made it through the academy. Were there people that were significant in the support or teaching you and helping you through that process to get to graduation day?
I will say that there were individuals and then there were groups. So that first cadre I told you about, Michelle Fitzpatrick, I know she's working on this 50th.
Yep. She's so wonderful.
Great. And she was on the sailing team with me. And Sue Donner, Sue Bebo, was a very excellent intercollegiate dinghy sailor. And I was on the women's team. There was a women's sailing team in those days. It wasn't joint like it is now. And so Sue would usually drive a Coast Guard GV, government vehicle, up to the regattas in Boston or wherever. And so she was a second-class cadet when I was a swab. And so having women like Michelle Fitzpatrick and Sue Donner, now Bebo, driving us and kind of showing us how, to be cadets and how to go to a varsity athletic competition and navigate, no pun intended, really navigate how to get there, how to perform. We learned a lot from those women, but also from the entire sailing team. To go to the groups, I was a member of the sailing team, and it was just a lot of a camaraderie. It was just our escape down to Jacob's Rock with people who were like-minded, who didn't look at gender at all. All those sailors, most of them men, didn't care if we were women or men, because, quite frankly, most everyone came from a high school that was mixed. So this was no big deal to be with women, right? I was in Glee Club and Icebreakers and part of the church group. All these were havens. So a lot of it was individuals. Lawson Brigham, he was a retired captain, but then a lieutenant, assistant sailing coach. There were people who reached out their hand to bring me up to where I needed to be. Individuals, women, men, and groups. There was a lot of support there. You had to be receptive to it. I think having a positive attitude really carried me a long way. Having fortitude over fragility. I never wanted to be a fragile person, and I'm partly German. So it could be, there's always this question of nature or nurture, right? Yeah. I was born maybe with a bit of the German in me where I'm not going to be bullied around. Even though I was kind of shy, very shy, I was going to be, maybe feeling like I was overwhelmed. And maybe there was an environmental factor I couldn't control, but I was not going to let it get to me because I had personal agency over my own feelings. I couldn't control everything around me, but I could control how I responded to that adversity. And I chose to prove people wrong or to prove myself that I could do it.
Yeah, I love that. Man, that's something I'm still working on, of controlling my feelings some days.
Me too. It's a lifelong journey, right?
It is. Yeah. No, but that's such a good reminder of there are so many things out of your control on a day-to-day basis, on an hourly basis, but you can control you, and just having sometimes that small piece of control can be really grounding. People supporting you is kind of a big part of that ability to succeed and make it through. And then you graduate, and eventually you find yourself as the first female CO on the Great Lakes, on the cutters. For you, I know the feeling of getting an assignment is kind of just okay, this is my next job. But receiving that assignment, did you feel the gravity of that situation as being the first female CO on the Great Lakes?
No. Once again, I tend to be naive. So it was 1990. I was the military aide to the Secretary of Transportation, who was our service secretary in those days, before we came to DHS. And I received orders to be the captain of the Katmai Bay. And this is in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, way up north, bordering Canada.
Practically Canada.
Yeah, Sault Ste. Siberia, they call it. And I was all excited. Somebody in the office told me, Sandy, I was going to be the first woman to command a ship on the Great Lakes. Maybe the first military woman. I'm sure there was ancient people back in the day that captained ships back in the earlier days of navigating the Great Lakes. But in recent history, the first woman. And somebody told me, Sandy, those older captains of those great big 1,000-foot ore carriers, iron ore carriers, aren't going to want to be, they're not going to want the ice broken and to trust a woman at the helm of a ship that's going to be responsible for breaking the ice and clearing a path for them through these really narrow waterways of the St. Mary's River. And so I'm like, okay, I didn't really think much of it because I was too busy to care. But when I got to the ship, there's a lot of stories there. You can see my book way back there in the corner.
Oh, yeah.
I tell a lot of these stories in my book. But when I arrived in the Sioux to take command of that ship, first of all, my change of command, Secretary Skinner, the Secretary of Transportation, flew in to be there. And I thought nothing of it. I was a lieutenant. I didn't know that in those days, 1990, so long ago, the district commander was so angry at this upstart lieutenant that the secretary was there for their change of command, and that meant he had to go. Normally it would just be the group commander would hold a change of command. The group commander would be like a sector commander nowadays. And so the sector commander, after the ceremony was over, took me aside and he said to me, looked me in the eye and he said, "You're just the secretary's fair-haired golden girl. We'll see how long you last here." What? And I had just taken command of this ship. And the media, I was on the first page of the Sioux Evening News. I didn't expect any of that. So I was naive. I just thought I was going to go, like you said, Nicolle, and take another job. And yeah, I knew it was going to be hard and all, but I didn't expect my own service to be my worst enemy, my bosses, to be angry that an upstart lieutenant, and I was so shy. Nobody could call me an upstart. But that's what they saw. And the media wanted to interview me, and I had to find ways to turn it back on the crew and the Coast Guard. I didn't want to be the first and the only. I just wanted to be another cutterman. But I could never escape being the first, so I learned that whenever they wanted to put the microphone in my face to say, "Look at this crew. There's 17 people on this 140-foot ship, and they're the ones who keep it going every day, doing the mission, breaking the ice. And the Coast Guard's a great organization. They've advanced women." So I would do that instead of making it about me, to the best that I could. And what else I did was I thought about that comment someone had gave me about the ship captains. So I asked one of the shipping companies if I could ride along on a familiarization ride with one of the great 1,000-foot lake ore carriers. So these guys are all like 70 years old by the time they work their way up to be able to captain one of these ships.
Okay.
60, 70, they're old. Well, I'm 66 now. When you're 30, it seems really old. I jumped on board one of these ore carriers, and you could tell the master was a little bit concerned about, a woman. This is a young girl who's going to be escorting my ship down this narrow St. Rivers River, this dangerous passage where sometimes there's only like 1.5 feet on each side of the ship. So I feel that one thing that I was good at and that women can be good at, especially 30 years ago when it wasn't so accepted to be open, people were more reserved and kept their cards close to their chest. And I was like, what you see is what you get. So I'm like talking to the master and saying, "Hey, when we're coming down this corner here, like a 45-degree turn, how can I, as a 140-foot ship and you're a 1,000-foot ship, what do I do to make sure I cut the ice?" And I've been on through icebreakers 3 years, the Glacier and the Polar Star, so I knew about cutting ice. I said, "How do I cut the ice to make the turn big enough so your bow can get through that and you can follow me around?" And he was like, "No one's ever asked me that before. They've always just told me, here's what we're going to do. You're going to follow us." And I'm like, "Oh, well, I just want to know, you're the one who navigates this river. Tell me what I can do to best serve you when winter comes and I start breaking ice for you." And he warmed up to me. His whole demeanor changed. He was now friendly. So I learned a huge lesson from that you have to reach out to people where they are and bring them up to where you want them to be. I wanted him to see me as a professional, competent mariner, not as a young woman. And I was different looking in those days. People would tell me I looked like a librarian, a school teacher, angelic. All these didn't look like a sea captain, right? So how can you be one if you don't look like one?
Yeah, where's your big white beard?
Exactly. But it became more fun as people got to know me and my reputation went around. So I did what I could without even knowing it. Looking back, though, I was building a service reputation of trust with a maritime community there in the Sioux. So that was a huge lesson for me. And that captain, it worked out okay. He did put me through the ringer. But one day, the chief bosun mate, who was the deck department head, went up to this captain who'd been a Mustang, which means he came up from the ranks and he had been enlisted. He made captain. He was really old. And this bosun mate chief went in, shut the door of the captain's office and said, "You got to stop picking on our captain our CO, because it's ruining morale on the ship, because she's doing a good job, and yet you're constantly putting the ship down. And the crew feels it. You're not, doing any good." And so that chief went in there and confronted the captain and put him in his place in a respectful way, I guess. It was behind closed doors, and I never knew about it until years later when the chief let me know that he had done that. And I was like, that's why the guy all of a sudden laid off me. So that was a man, a chief petty officer, standing up for a lieutenant and mentoring or being an ally to me. Right. So I've had men, that old sea captain, a lot of older men on the Great Lakes took me under their wing after some of these experiences and helped me to understand the nature of the lakes and their lure and how to interact with people and how to succeed.
I love that story about your chief. That's amazing. And I actually kind of love that you didn't know that it happened. You know, it wasn't something he was like, oh, I'm going to go in there. And it was like, no, this is the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And I feel like sometimes it's not thought about the extra you had to go through to prove your competence, right? Like, I feel if it was a male CO, there never would have been any question once they took command that they were competent or could do the job, you know, from those older captains on those bigger ships.
Thank you to our alumni community for your continued engagement. You are what keep this community strong and thriving, especially our members. Membership in your alumni association matters. It empowers connections between our alumni and the Academy to develop thriving and enduring relationships. It supports state-of-the-art and margin of excellence enhancements for the Corps of Cadets. And membership also comes with some pretty cool benefits, like access to professional development and certifications, unique connection opportunities to grow your network, discounts and savings when welcoming back the whole family for homecoming, and so much more. Your membership even supports projects like this podcast. So stay connected, stay up to date, and ensure that your ties to the Long Blue Line remain strong. Become a member today at cgaalumni.org/1887.
Eventually, you find yourself back at the Academy as the first female superintendent. But I think more than that, you had this opportunity to see a full cycle, right, of women entering the Academy. And then in the 2011-12 timeframe, and I was there, so I can kind of speak to it, nobody really thought about the integration of women. Like, it was just normal. Like, we were just there. We were co-ed. We were integrated. Like, it was just a part of it. There was women's sports. There were men's sports. It's not something I think that was on female cadets' minds on the daily. So for you to now be there as the superintendent, I'm curious what you kind of went in as like, all right, I want to make sure this is happening and I want to improve it upon this way. Were there some of those thoughts getting back to the Academy?
Surely. I got notification that I would be superintendent about 5 months before I took over the job. So once again, I was the first woman to lead any of the Armed Forces Service Academies. And so there was letters coming in from Congress congratulating me. It was difficult in that the expectations were so high. And on the same side of the coin, this is 2011, like you said, because I came in 2011 to 15. If you read some of the comments in the news articles that were announcing there's a woman going to be taking over one of the service academies, some of the comments would be like, she should be at home in the kitchen taking care of her kids. What's she doing out there? Well, I don't even have any kids. So you still had, all those years later, some of those perceptions. Mm-hmm. When I got there, then I knew that this, I could never escape being the first, because of one of the first women, and you promote in the military really kind of just by different ranks up through the years. Even though there's merit in that you have to make the grade, because there's a lot of, that selection rate is very low as you get higher up, you still go up with your classmates. You can't get that much ahead or anything. So I was always destined to be the first of wherever I went. So I kind of was used to that, but I did know that when I got there, I'd be under the spotlight again. So I definitely wanted to be as ready as I could be, so that, going back to your question about, my thoughts on what I would do to make sure that I was accounting for whatever there might be for still issues with women that I was setting a good example, that I was ready, prepared, stepping into the job competent, looking to build trust and earn respect with everybody, all stakeholders, cadets, faculty, staff, outside entities. So I knew that I needed to build trust and earn respect early on. So I actually went around, I got permission from my boss to go around and visit every other superintendent of the other service academies, all 4 of the other ones. And I spent a couple of days with each one looking at their installations and talking with the superintendents and getting great advice on what they were doing so that I was able to put together some thoughts on my goals and objectives for the academy before I even arrived to be installed as superintendent. I also happened to be serving on the board of directors. It made it easier. I knew some of the academy issues. So I was well prepared for the job. And I did have one of my goals was to continue working to advance diversity initiatives, because there's so much there, and it can become so narrowly focused on different people's agendas, and people look at diversity as all demographic. I sort of wanted to broaden the thoughts on diversity to, cognitive diversity, experiential diversity. There's so much there that makes a campus, a college environment robust, and so much that goes to accepting. And I think cadets now I know you took a DISC assessment, a personality test that tests how you fit into a team. And so it shows how you're different in cognitive areas and in experiential areas, so that if you're acting a certain way on the summer sailing cadet coastal sail training program, for instance, when you're thrown together with people you don't even know, maybe, if you're acting a certain way, people aren't going to say, she's a jerk. They're going to say, I guess she must have been a special,
a D
category on the DISC.
Right.
Exactly. And so I think that it was important to broaden the definition of diversity to be much more inclusive, so that it respected the differences in your way you think, and where you've been, what you've done, what you're interested in. And that was important to me. And I tried to earn respect by getting out and going to their spaces. And I remember my secretary, she said, oh, ma'am, you can't go walking around to other, people's spaces to meet with them. They come to you. They come into your office. And I'm like, they do. I was used to being at ships for 12 years. So I was, deck plate leadership. You get out and you walk around and you see where people work, and it empowers them to have the superintendent come into their spaces, and they can walk around with the superintendent to visit their people. So I did little things like that came from my shipboard time that I think helped build trust and earn respect over time. And it helped to take away some of that mystery of having a woman coming in. And the only people that it was really harder for was the older alumni who weren't ready for a woman. I had to deal with them, but I found ways to do it. So there's stories there that I won't go into, but they were kind of funny. And in the end, I ended up, I think, getting along with most of the older alumni too.
Yeah. You won them over eventually by meeting them where they were at.
I guess I should tell the story real quick. I won this one older alumni with a kiss.
Oh, did you?
Here's how it went. I'm standing there at the homecoming football game my first year. This older guy who's a 50-year class guy, so an old guy. I had just finished going down for push-ups. I was in my trops, and I'd gone down for push-ups with the swabs, or the fourth class cadets by then, because we had a touchdown. I come up, I'm all happy. I'm up in the bleachers, just walking around. And this guy looks at me, and he says, this is a big job you got here. Are you sure you're up for it? And there's people all around. It's a football game. And so what do you say when you're the superintendent and somebody accosts you like that? And his wife is poking him in the side. I say, you're right. It is a big job. And I'm proud to be here. I'm honored to be in this job. And then I turned around and went my way. Well, then we go down to the reception at the Alumni Center, where you have the reception for the 50-year class after the game. And I know a lot of these 50-year guys. I forget why, but I just knew a lot of these guys. And so I go up and I see one guy I know really well. I hug him, give him a peck on the cheek, and I'm making my way through the room. And then I hug this one guy I know, give him a peck on the cheek, and I hear this guy behind me, I want a kiss. It's that same old codger. And so I turned around and I gave him a peck on the cheek, and he had seen that a bunch of his classmates liked me. Yeah. And so to his credit, he said, okay, I guess she's okay.
Yeah.
And
Aw.
so it makes a funny story. Does it get old having to prove yourself? Yeah. I would tell my husband, I'm tired of this. If it was just once, I wouldn't mind. But then a few weeks later, another similar incident to that would happen.
Yeah.
People not trusting you based on who you are and your merit, but they want to have you prove yourself. And I've always been the kind of person that wants to just err on the side of trusting somebody, regardless of how they look, as long as they're competent and capable. Why do I want them to prove themselves? Now, I think, on the other hand, a new ensign going out to a ship, don't get me wrong, you need to prove yourself by hard work and perseverance, but it shouldn't be that that's the only thing. You should come on board and be welcomed, accepted, included, feel like you belong. And then, you prove yourself because you have the passion that you want to live up to these high expectations, right? That's kind of how I always felt like I could get by and succeed.
Right. But I think an ensign coming onto a ship is very different than an admiral who has earned the position of superintendent.
And they still want you to prove yourself.
Right. But I think, again, it shows allies and supporters are key in successes, and to surround yourself with people that believe in you and support you.
And to make those friends and make those relationships along the way. And don't ever give up an opportunity to make a new friend or a new colleague or something, because they come back in the end to support you or just to be there to make you. I mean, so in the end of the day, when you get to be an admiral, you look back on your career and you're like, it's all about the people. And you hear that at retirements. I joined for the mission and I stayed for the people. Well, it might sound like a cliche, but it's true. And so I find that my greatest satisfaction in the Coast Guard, looking back on it, is the people I met. The people who believed in me, who were there for me, the people I tried to believe in and mentored, and then seeing some of those young women, a lot of them women, some men, they're so busy now they don't have a time to email me, but that's because they've done so well, right? And it's so satisfying to see the next generation of young people who've replaced me now that I'm retired, and they're more competent than I ever was. I feel like that's the best measure of success.
Yeah. Leaving it better than you found it.
Yeah,
right?
and leaving people in your shoes who are better than you were. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I have to know, though, as superintendent, I'm sure you went to a few of the dances. How different was it, and what did you feel?
So in our day, in 1980s, 50 years ago, we had to do like the waltz and the New York hustle, and that's the kind of music that was playing. Well, my husband Bob and I would go to these dances and watch. And there was a time in the between the 11 and 15 when I was there, like maybe 13, 14, where the young people would no one had real dates. I mean, they might have gone with a guy or a gal, depending. They might have gone with a date, but in the end, they were all in the middle of that Leamy Hall dance floor, just kind of like crammed together, bopping. I mean, there was no dancing at all. And it was just, they were crammed together, bopping, and they were just having fun. Yeah. And they could do whatever they wanted to do. There was no real dancing. Nobody was doing this fancy swing dancing or anything like we would try to do in our day. And it was much more casual and less structured. It was fun to see, because even though it's different for cadets nowadays, it's still a chance for them to let loose, right? They could be out there on the dance floor and they know they're not being judged. They can let loose.
Yeah, I definitely know what you're talking about.
These huddles of cadets just kind of bopping. They weren't really even dancing like this, like they were just kind of bopping, like bobbing in the water, like with a Mae West vest on or something.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. All right, I know we're getting close to time, but I did have a few more things I kind of wanted to talk about, and really bringing it back to us doing this podcast for the 50 years of women being at the Academy. What are some of those big changes that you saw from your start at the Academy to that time where you superintendent, even now looking back, and I'm sure you've traveled back to the Academy since retirement, what are some of those feelings you get kind of looking around and seeing how much has happened over 50 years, which really isn't that much time, but a lot has happened?
Well, I have been associated with the Academy quite a bit before taking on as superintendent. Never assigned there, though, for like a instructor or a company officer, but had been back for PCO, PXO school a couple of times, had been on the board of trustees, the BOT for the Academy, and been up there for different events over time. So a little bit more gradual, whereas some people really do come back for the first time at like their 20th reunion or something. Right. So I had seen a little bit of the transition, and I already knew that it was kind of like mirrored society. It's not a whole lot different than society. So when I was there in the late 70s, there was more what was going on in society. Now in the, where we are now 50 years later, society's changed. So the first thing people should understand is that, sure, cadets are doing a different curriculum and different things now. It's 50 years later. Society's changed. I think I noticed most strongly that it's like a college, any college campus that's mixed integrated gender. There's 37% or so women now. I'm not sure my number's exactly right, but it's pretty close. And that's, a lot. Well over a third. It's pushing up to 40. So it's more like a regular high school or college. And I noticed that athletics, we have parity in athletics. When I was there was only a couple of sports for women. Gwen Keenan did a good article for the Alumni Bulletin on the early history of women in sports. And it was hard. There weren't any sports for women in those days. And I was a sailor because of that, because I was a walk-on. I hadn't sailed anywhere before, but you could go into a sailboat with somebody else, with a crew, and you could learn how to sail and be on a team. Same with crew. You could get 4 women in a boat and you could go. And then I think there was like individual gymnasts and things. Now we have varsity sports. When I was a superintendent, the athletic director, Tim Fitzpatrick, and I helped bring lacrosse up, women's lacrosse, to a varsity sport, not just club. So women have full parity with men in sports. And I, as a young girl, was a swimmer and a track athlete. And the confidence I built on the playing field of life helped make me successful. So I had experienced loss and failure. I'd been hit and knocked down, right? I'd been my own worst enemy. I'd, failed myself. I had learned these things on the athletic field. And so to me, women's sports, having parity was so important. So those are some of the observations that I had that were the most noticeable changes since in 50 years.
Yeah. And do you feel pride in that you kind of were pivotal and instrumental in some of those things? Or is it just like, I was just doing my job?
No, I always answer the first thing that comes out of my mind. I didn't ever feel pride in being one of the first, but I feel a sense of accomplishment and always trying to overcome that being the first and help people understand that we should be judged on our merits. And sure, it's great that there's now women moving up the ranks in my day, getting into positions where they hadn't been before, but we shouldn't be defined by that. And there was a tendency to define you by that. Right. And that's why the articles, first woman, regardless of your competence, it was going to be you're the first woman or something. So I'd rather focus on other things that you can control. You can't control your gender, but you can control your performance, your character, the core values that drive you, the way you lead, the way you build trust, earn respect. You can control all those things, but you can't control how you were born. So I never wanted to focus on that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so important. Like we were saying earlier, you can control your feelings and how you respond and react to things. And that's just about it.
Right. Exactly.
Especially in the military where you can't even control where you go. And then final question for women entering the academy today. What's your advice to that young female cadet that's kind of struggling? Wow, I'm getting to the academy and I'm getting yelled at, or I'm not totally welcome, or I'm really struggling because I was valedictorian, or I was the captain of my team and I was the best, and now I'm just average. And like, that's not a fun feeling.
Because it's easy looking back on it, right? So we've been talking a little bit about what you can control. And I have a whole chapter on the control paradox in my book. So we've mentioned that already, but I didn't know that when I was a cadet. I realized that reflecting back years later that, man, I guess I got through that because I chose to prove them wrong. I chose not to let that bother me, but it did bother me at first. And I just grew more used to having to put it aside, whatever it was. A test that was coming up that was on my mind. I couldn't control the fact that I had a test the next day. Somebody who maybe had, yelled at me that maybe I didn't even deserve it. Maybe I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sometimes that happens. And I just learned to put that out of my mind. So I wish I had known earlier. Although one thing I will say is that young people have to learn for themselves and go through their own experiences. You could give them the advice from a fleet of admirals, and then they wouldn't be better for it because they have to experience it themselves and find their own way through. Because it might have worked for me to not take it personally, to condense that all down and just to try to not let it bother me. But that only comes from experience. You can't just tell somebody that. The first time they get yelled at, that advice is nowhere near them and it's gone. Right. So better advice might be try to be respected, not liked. And I remember when I first came to the academy, Facebook was bigger amongst younger people, were even using it then, but friending people, And so there was this whole thing about being nice and being friends. And no, I mean, I think that in a professional environment, even a workplace that's not military, you should go into a new position somewhere and strive to be respected, not to be a friend of other people. And eventually the friendships are going to come with the right people at the right time. But if you're a young ensign, male or female, going out to your first ship, and you're like, how about, how can I come on board and be liked by everybody, be the cool new ensign? I'm not going to be one of those jerks they talk about, but instead I'm going to overreact and be the cool ensign. The crew, the enlisted crew, they aren't going to respect that. They want an ensign coming on who's competent, modest in whatever way that means, wants to get the job done, is trying to earn their respect by working hard, by respecting them, by taking care of them. So I think that people confuse that. They want to go out and try to be liked. And there's this whole thing about being nice nowadays. And my thing is be fair, be firm and fair, and look to be respected. Don't try to be nice and liked, because those things just get you in trouble because they disappoint you, because you end up thinking you've done all the right things, and then you're wondering why people don't really respect you behind your back, right?
Yeah.
And I would also give people one more lesson that I didn't really get to tell many stories. I'm a storyteller, and they can get my book if they want. All the proceeds get donated to the academy. But when I was an ensign on the Glacier, I walked on there without some of these lessons that I have now got from 40 years in uniform. And my first few weeks on board, I was an import officer of the day. And I was in charge of the people who were on punishment detail. We used to call it extra military instruction in those days, EMI. I don't think it's there anymore, but it was punishment detail, extra hours after the liberty had been granted. And there was a fireman, as low as you can go, who had gotten in trouble. And I was supervising him in the bilges, cleaning the bilges. And he wasn't doing what he was ordered to do. So I went to my boss and I said, how do I lead a person who doesn't want to be led? How do I compel compliance from this fireman? And my boss looked at me and he said, Sandy, in the Coast Guard, if you're going to succeed, there's three kinds of power you got to know about: personal power, professional power, and position power. He said, if you're going to succeed, you need to lean on the first two: your personal power, which is your emotional intelligence, how you treat people; your professional power, which is how you present yourself, what you know, how hard you work; and use your position power only as a last resort. And I never forgot that. It's the 3 P's of power. If you go in and try to use your personal and professional powers, so how would I maybe have affected that fireman? Maybe instead of just telling him, hey, Fireman Gooblatz, you're not doing this job, get it done. Maybe I could have said, hey, Fireman Gooblatz, how'd you get in trouble? Where'd you come from? How do you like it on board here? Maybe try to build a relationship with Fireman Gooblatz, just 5 minutes. And then, hey, do you mind getting this oil cleaned up? Because your boss is going to come in the morning and you really want to get off this EMI and get back to just doing your job. So if I had done that, maybe he would have responded differently. So I never forgot the 3 P's of power that my first boss taught me on my very first ship. And I would add that as advice to a cadet, even in the barracks, but certainly when you go out to your first ship.
Yeah. Yeah, most definitely. It's all about the people. Like you had mentioned before, right? Retiring, it's the people that make the difference, and you only get to know those people by building those relationships and knowing who they are, as opposed to what their rank is and what their job is supposed
Absolutely.
to be. Admiral, thank you so much for your time and your participation in this podcast. It's been such a joy and a pleasure to speak to you and all these other women that have been so impactful with the stories that they have to the women now and even men. I've interviewed a few men actually
Good.
that have been impacted by women joining the service and being a part of everything that we do.
Awesome. And thank you, Nicolle. You're a very good podcaster interviewer.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you in April at the 50 Years of Women celebration at the Academy.
I will see you there. I'm registered.
Sounds good. I'll talk to you then.
Bye.
Bye. Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a moment to recognize someone who helped make another person's journey possible. As part of 50 Years of Her Story, we're inviting alumni to share a moment of gratitude, a chance to thank the classmates, mentors, instructors, coaches, family members, and friends whose support made a lasting difference. Here's this episode's moment of gratitude.
My name is Megan McGrath. At the Academy, my last name was Blackaby, and I graduated in 1994. I want to give a shout out today to Ellen Metcalf. When I was here, she was the only female, I think, in uniform, and she was amazing to the women in my class and other classes, but we just loved her, and she just really kind of set the bar for who I wanted to be when I graduated. And since then, I've been lucky enough to still see her and know her and run into her every once in a while, and she hasn't changed a bit. So just want to give a shout out to her for just kind of setting the bar and showing us we could also do what she does.
Thank you for listening to this episode of 50 Years of Her Story. Sandy's story is a reminder that being the first was never the point for her. It was building enough trust and competence that the next women and the women after that wouldn't have to prove themselves all over again. As we reflect on 50 years of women at the Coast Guard Academy, stories like Sandy's show us how far that legacy has traveled, from a class of 30 women learning to dance the New York hustle to a Corps of Cadets where nobody thinks twice. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and share it with someone who would appreciate these stories. I'm Nicolle Bogden. Thank you for listening.